Welcome to MWEB's Entrepreneur Zone. I'm Paul Hobden, and with me today I have Avi Lasarow, a serial entrepreneur and founder of Monetisation. Welcome, Avi. So tell us a bit more about your history and your recent development, Monetisation.
Sure. So I'm 37, and when I was 16, I went to go work for myself in the US in a sandwich shop. I didn't quite like making sandwiches, but it certainly helped pave my way and pay my way. So my next step from there was to work, I think, at Blockbuster Video, stacking videos, and just really trying to survive and make money and do things that gave me a lot of interest. I went to go live in the UK in my early 20s, did a number of roles, but finally moved on and into the DNA business, the DNA testing business. And that really was based on a personal experience. Set up a DNA testing company, nearly listed on the alternative investment market in the UK, but unfortunately didn't, because we sold shares at the time to a politician who didn't declare them in members' interests. And that was my first step into understanding politics, of course, which didn't turn out to my advantage at the time. But taking away from that experience, we then moved into a new sort of sector, which was drug testing. We commercialized the world's first hair alcohol test, so we'd be able to look at hair of parents and say how much alcohol they've had and what average alcohol consumption they've had over a 6-month period. And that became an instant success, specifically in the UK court systems, where they test now approximately 20 to 25,000 families a year in a way to help the court understand whether they are problematic to be, whether they have correct parental responsibility of their children, i.e. can they be an effective parent or not based on alcohol usage or intake. So that's really hair alcohol testing. That product has now been commercialized in Germany in terms of road traffic. In legislation, they are now saying that government can now test hairs of drivers to work out whether they have an alcohol problem as opposed to over a long-term period, and therefore should they be put in front of a wheel of a car as opposed to checking them instantaneously on the roadside, locking them up for a night and saying you can go back tomorrow to drive your car. So another great success. During the time of running that particular business, I had an idea that searching and looking at people's moles could be a way forward for the future, especially as mobile phone technology sort of progresses and medical science progresses. And what I've come to learn as an entrepreneur is that it's not always about money. Once you get to a certain level of sustainability in terms of your wealth, it becomes about making a difference. Because if you can make a difference, then the money will follow after. And certainly that's what we intend to do with this Mold Detect product. It's a product to test for the signs of melanoma on your mobile phone.
You yourself are not from a medical or a technical background, so it's interesting areas that you've got involved in.
Yeah, I'm not from a medical background whatsoever, and I have to say that in my experience, you don't need to understand the sector from an educational perspective really before you get into it. I think quite often when you move into a sector, the little you know about it, the better it is, because it allows you to perhaps maybe take more risks because you're less informed. But on the other hand, it allows you to perhaps market that products or whatever set of products from the sector in a way which scientists would perhaps not. So for example, in the topic of mold detection and melanoma, if a scientist was marketing an application or a suite of products around melanoma, they would speak a lot of science. And I think sometimes science needs to be demystified, and it scares the end user consumer away. And what I do is I pick up on the sector, I understand it as best I can, rapid learning, of course, and I sell it in a way which takes the science out of the laboratory and package it in a way which people can understand. I mean,
looking at mold detect as an example, these must be product development must take quite a substantial amount of time.
The Mold Detect product has taken us greater than 6 months to get it to the point at which it is at the moment. The previous person who started the initial algorithm development worked on it for approximately a year, so it's taken us a year and a half. It's still not where we want to get it to be, but we're pioneering, we believe, in terms of what we're doing.
And how are you taking it to market?
Okay, so of course the most important thing was to get the whole user experience correct, and also the analysis as accurate as possible as you could do for a mobile phone. And now that this is ready, the way to market is twofold really. One, obviously social media is very important. People today neglect to think about the power of where the internet is, where Facebook is, where social media is. And many years ago, as a parallel example, there used to be a screensaver. I think it was called the Yeti screensaver or SETI screensaver, and it looked at the sum of the parts is greater than the whole. And what it encouraged people to do was download the screensaver, and it would calculate data for NASA. And what will happen is everyone calculating data for NASA could therefore give that data to them, and then they can look for extraterrestrial intelligence. So in terms of taking this product to market, Mold Detect, social media is very important. So as people take pictures of their moles, we hope that they would then upload that picture, a nice cool little image of their mole, onto Facebook and into social media to encourage people to do the same. Because after all, melanoma is a term which is scary. People don't understand it, and through social media and communication, we can help people, understand it a bit better. Also, we realize that when you download the product, people are paying, 39 Rand to download a product onto their phone, which helps them look and search and determine whether or not their lesions and their moles could be problematic. And we think that is quite pioneering. So of course, PR and media is a big tactical plan for us. So we aim to do a good media launch coming up. We think that because these products are new, because it's so niche, we're going to get a good hit within the media. So to give you an example, we recently featured on the Dr. Oz show in the US. A 20-second slot got us approximately 4,200 downloads, which equated to about $25,000 or $23,000 all in 20 seconds. And we believe that media hit has a powerful impact on sales of online technology. So media is obviously very, very important for us, and how we talk to the media moving forward, I think.
I mean, this product really is adds to kind of or changes a bit the dynamics within the medical area. How's it been received by?
Okay, so the product has been received with skepticism in the medical arena, and that's primarily for a number of reasons. From my own experience as an entrepreneur, when working with niche medical technologies that do well, what tends to happen is the industries that you're working within start to potentially not revolt, but you're starting to take business away from them, which can be a little bit daunting, I think. So historically, we launched this hair alcohol testing product, and suddenly in the UK we're now doing 20,000 plus hair alcohol tests every year to help the courts. Yeah. And now that means the courts don't really have to go to the existing practitioners to go and get those reports done to give them the same information. So there's always a bit of an element of skepticism about these sorts of products. The key is we need to make sure these products work. We need to innovate with what we do, and we need to continue to lead this sort of technology because, for example, who would have thought that Facebook would have been here 10 years ago? It was an idea, the vision got turned into reality, and now it's become a de facto standard for interaction on a social basis. And similarly, I think with these medical products, 4 years ago or 5 years ago when I conceptualized Mold Detect, no one was doing it. Now there's a few companies doing it, and it's about taking it to the next level and doing it better than anyone else, and that's the key. Throughout your career, you've had a number of different ideas and taken them from an idea through to kind of substantial companies. What's the secret to doing that? The secret to taking the idea that you have and turning it into a reality is to firstly have a very clear vision on how you're going to do it and have a vision on what it's going to look like in its end state. And over time, I continue to demonstrate to myself and also to people who work with me more and more, which gives them enthusiasm too, that you really can turn visions into reality. In terms of my personal background, I don't have a metric, I don't have a university degree, and sometimes people think that's a prohibiting factor in becoming a successful entrepreneur or becoming a successful business person, and I just keep proving to myself that's not the case. Have an idea. Have belief in your idea and turn it into reality, because if you don't see it being turned into reality, it never will be a reality.
Avi, with the types of businesses that you've developed, you've had to surround yourself, I suspect, with some really strong technical people and strong members of your staff. How do you keep those people motivated and sell them on the vision that you have?
Okay, so firstly, one of my sort of philosophies are never to be afraid of having people around you who might be cleverer than you or better than you at a particular subject or topic. So over time, I've managed to, at least in historical businesses as well as in our current businesses, but I've managed to surround myself with MBAs, with professors, with scientists, and fortunately where I am today is because I have a success track record as part of my CV. It's a little bit easier for me to sell my visions to people because they can always reference my success track record. But I think the key is if you're passionate about your belief, you should be able to convince almost anyone, because your passion should be completely transparent in what you're selling, and therefore people should pick up on that. And the more you can push forward your ideas and the more you can turn these ideas into realities, the more people are going to believe you. Historically, for example, with hair alcohol testing, and I keep referencing this example because it's one of my favorites, where we've made a difference in the lives of people on a daily basis, is, there was a professor in Germany called Professor Dr. Fritz Prachst, and, he was, there, he must be 1970s, I would say, and for years he looked at hair alcohol testing as a technology to help sort of high-risk industries and, children and families and what have you. And when he did his original analysis, he looked at, I think, 1,000 subjects. He looked at their hair and this technology within their hair, and he compared it to their blood results for alcohol, their breath results for alcohol, and other factors, their self-diagnosis of what alcohol they've been drinking. And, and that was really where it stopped. And he kept on looking at things like fetal alcohol syndrome and other projects around this technology, but it never really went further than that. So when I knew that hair drug testing, which was the current business I was in, was a de facto standard for testing drugs, I knew there must be something similar for alcohol. So I sourced him, found him, and encouraged him to work with me on commercializing the technology. We did that, and now what's happened as a result of that, we now send him thousands and thousands of new cases and their information, scientific information to him to reanalyze. And therefore, he enhances the technology and re-commercialized a better version of it on a regular basis, because you have the academic kind of science behind it.
If we look at Mold Detect, it's quite or slightly different in the sense that your previous businesses have been kind of selling to governments and to big business. This is now selling to individuals. How do you see the challenges of those two different businesses?
Look, one of the things I ask myself on a daily basis is it's almost better sometimes to sell 200 of a product, to 200 customers on a higher margin, then try and get thousands and thousands and thousands of people to download an application, paying $5, $35, or whatever the conversion is. What's the easier sell? But the reason why I'm doing this Mold Detect business is because I really believe that this is pioneering technology. I believe that technology like this can be used in third world countries, very important. And also I want to grow the biggest database in the world of moles and their demographics around those moles. And the reason I want to do that is because I believe that it'll be very valuable to give back to academia to then go and research melanoma, because suddenly now, because of technology, we're going to have millions of moles, their location, what the UV status was, what the sun was, what country they were in, what parallel and sort of longitude and latitude they were in. And I think if we can make this world's largest database happen, then we can give that to science to then obviously add value and commercialize and do things that give it value effectively. And so really, even though this is a business, and yes, I'd like to recover the cost for the money I've invested to date, I have a much bigger vision with Mold Detect, and that is the database, that is third world countries, and that is just continuing to be on that cutting edge of technology, which is very niche, and I think something will open up which will give it its big return. And just a comparable subject to that is there's something called the iNetra project, where they're taking mobile phones and they're taking that to India and countries where, third world countries, and they take pictures of eyes on the mobile phone, and you can then, work out if they've got cataracts or not, or you can then look at things like, lenses, what lenses they need, and all from your mobile phone. And I think that's the kind of way the world is going.
You talk about this business, it's cutting edge technology, and it's going to have an influence around the world. And there's a strong South African connection. How do you see South Africa as a player in this global market?
Look, there's no doubt that, well, firstly, South Africa has a big melanoma issue itself. So in terms of the technology being applied to South Africa, I think it being emerging from South Africa and happening in South Africa, it's a perfect place to actually to play around with this stuff. When I say play around, I mean, seriously work with this sort of technology. I think South Africa has a big role to play technology globally. And then we have good resources in the science community for sure. Technology, industry, very, very good resources. And I think the benefit about developing these sorts of technologies in South Africa is you can do it at a fraction of the cost of what you can do it elsewhere in the world. And of course, that means your money as an entrepreneur goes a lot further because you can get a bigger spend for your buck.
Avi, you've had a series of businesses, and with each one, I'm sure you've had learnings that you've been able to take on to the next business. If you were to share with people kind of 3 key learnings for you, what would they be?
I think the first learning, as one of my key learnings that I want to share with you that comes to mind, is always make sure you have a robust legal framework between yourself and your business partners. I was involved in a situation where I went and started a business based on trust and entered into a cooperation agreement on trust on a 50-50 sort of basis, and all great. But as soon as the money starts rolling in, people's sort of agendas change slightly, and needs for more money change slightly. So one, have a good legal framework with yourself and your partner is very, very important, and it's worth investing in that process up front before you actually get into business with them. Two, if you are going to get into a legal fight with anyone, it's worth to go to the best lawyers that you can afford. Quite often the brand of the lawyer makes a bigger difference as the actual follow through from the lawyer itself. So when you get into a legal fight, people see you dealing with a top lawyer, they know you're serious. But most importantly, never just be a dog without teeth. If you're going to make threats when you get into fights with people through business, I think it's really important to execute on those threats and follow all the way through. I myself have been involved in a couple high court battles. It's not a great experience, but when you go to court and you believe in what you're fighting for, the likelihood is you'll succeed, and I think that sends a powerful message to ones around you. And as a third lesson, I think just really don't be scared to surround yourself with people that know more than you. As mentioned earlier, I think they often can be a great value to your team and help implement your ideas.
Mold Detect is, in a sense, a new business model in terms of its bringing kind of medical diagnosis into people's hands, or at least educating them. Do you see that being a trend going forward?
100%. I see a massive trend in mobile phone applications being used in the medical arena. For example, health and fitness is a very big category. You look in people who are just doing little simple things like calorie counting, gym applications, running applications. But when it comes to things more serious like melanoma, I think without a doubt, larger companies are going to start to use these tools to educate consumers about what they should be doing. So I think this trend will continue to grow. I think big companies will continue to use such tools until they become a de facto standard for people to often, determine what's going on with their bodies. Quite often when I go to the general practitioner, or when I say quite often, I hardly go because I'm always working, but when I do need to go, I usually go to the internet and look up the symptoms of what I'm feeling on the internet. So I get to the general practitioner, he often looks in his book and stuff, and you tend to know a lot more than they do. I say that with great respect, of course. You know a lot about your symptom and what it could be versus going to them as a general practitioner and getting that advice. And I think what will happen, especially with younger generations who are much more technology savvy and much more used to their phone, using Mixit and all this kind of stuff, and much more comfortable with their phones, this will become a second nature. They'll look at their phone to give themselves a pre-diagnosis to what they could be experiencing as a result of their symptoms. So when they get to their doctor, they're going to go, "Doctor, this is what I think I have. What do you think? These are the reasons why." And it's up to people like us entrepreneurs, to take that a step further, to make sure that doctors can perhaps have preliminary work done for them. They can access the medical records of the consumer because we bring that technology to them. So our job, I think, in developing mobile phone technologies for medical applications is to work with practitioners and make their lives easier, as opposed to trying to replace them. I think replacing them is not the right way forward.
And in terms of the monetization of Mold Detect, you've got a number of different avenues that you can go down. How do you see that panning out? Not necessarily just with Mold Detect, but with all apps.
Okay, so specifically with Mold Detect, because obviously that's where my heart is at this point in time in terms of applications. What we know for sure is that people are downloading the application on a daily basis, and they're paying, in dollar terms, $5 a download. So that to me indicates that we have a successful lead generation model. So if we were going to now do a marketing exercise, the model initially would be, let's say we spend R1 million. How many downloads can we drive to get people to pay to check their moles because they believe there's value in this application? And then we'll get a percentage. And then the next thing is, what do we do with that percentage? How do we then build a model around that? Because lead generation isn't necessarily a business model as such. It's just showing that there is a way to get some revenues, I think, initially. So one of the potential scenarios is we have another product which we're working on, which is teledermatology. So quite often in rural locations or in third world countries, or in fact even in first world countries in the UK where you have the National Health Service, people can't get to the dermatologist quickly enough. So what we want to do is, once people have bought into the Mold Detect scenario and application, to say, look, your mole could be cancerous, or you have another skin problem, and sell them a teledermatology experience. So for 150, 200 Rand, they can then go online and they can consult with a dermatologist, and they can actually take that skin care or that skin worry to the next level and have the patient care which they deserve. Of course, another way, of course, is Mold Detect is our core business, but we're developing a range of UV products called Mold Protect, and we hope to then also give to these people confidence that as the company which has the world's largest database of moles and therefore the most experience in this technology, we also recommend a range of products which they can use for themselves to protect them from UV exposure.
Avi, as someone that at 16 packed up and went to live in the States. You've gone from that through to being very successful in the businesses that you've run. Tell us how things have changed.
One of the things I would say that have changed in the run-up to success in business is I think there's a massive paradigm shift from being entrepreneurial with no money to being entrepreneurial where you have an element of wealth that you've created. For me, the biggest challenge was sort of not worrying about how to spend the money, but of course how to conserve the money. And so with my last company, which I sold, I went literally from one day having 100 people working for me, calling me up on a daily basis, making decisions on a daily basis, being in the action, which is now what I describe it, because that's really what you get addicted to as an entrepreneur, is the action of making business and ideas come to reality. To literally, the next day, no one calling me, no one really needing me in the context of that business, having some extra zeros on your bank balance. And no real income coming in. And suddenly you start, confronting yourself with all kinds of decisions. What am I going to do next? How am I going to do it? Because it's in the blood being an entrepreneur, I believe. And, and then you get some, at least I got, and I understand from many other entrepreneurs, you get a level of anxiety because suddenly your bank balance just goes down on a daily basis, and it just goes down and down and down and down. It's like a big tap which you just can't switch off because you want ideas to happen, you want things to happen, and so that's been the biggest transition I think for me as an entrepreneur is once you get to a certain level of wealth that you've created, is adapting your thinking to how to preserve the wealth that you've created, and at the same time following through on your entrepreneurial visions.
So where to next for yourself and for Mold Detect?
There's so many opportunities that are available and out there, and you just need to find them, and if they don't find you, because there comes a point as well when they just start to find you. And it's about managing which opportunities will give you the most fun and excitement and will make a difference, but give you the best return. And I think for me at the moment, I'm already involved in a number of projects. I'm trying to not take on more projects. I want to make sure that Mold Detect and these other projects develop the success which I want. And that's my goal for the next 12, 24 months.
And that brings us to our rapid round of questions. What's the best advice you've ever received?
The best advice I've ever received is to follow your dreams, make sure they happen, and don't stop until they do happen.
And your best moment as an entrepreneur?
My best moment as an entrepreneur was somehow helping my country in the process of the work that I do. So, for example, I was helping the Libyan government do the DNA analysis of all the victims of a flight that left Johannesburg and crashed in Tripoli. And of course, there were South Africans on board that flight, so it made a real difference to the work that I was doing. It had a real cause and a purpose.
And the biggest mistake you've made?
Biggest mistake I've made as an entrepreneur is probably not do as much business planning as I need to before launching an idea. As an entrepreneur, you need to sometimes just make things happen because it's in your blood, and that's what I do quite often. However, mistake being you don't really get to the details sometimes before you execute, and having someone near you who can pull your feet back on the ground, I think, is always beneficial.
What quality do you look for in people that you work with?
It's just people that aren't scared to get their hands dirty, work late nights, and make sure your vision comes to reality.
And what does an entrepreneur need to succeed?
An entrepreneur needs to have the staying power to drop everything else in their path to make sure that their visions come into realities. But you also need to, saying that, in reverse of that, you also need to be able to stop when you see your vision isn't coming to reality in terms of, you get so stuck in what you're trying to do, you can't really see if it's working or not. And at some point, you need to also take an assessment and say, is it working or not, and move on to the next one.
And what's the biggest inspiration for you as a small business owner?
I really think the biggest inspiration for me is actually, making the difference in what you do, creating the jobs for the people around you, making sure they're happy when they come to work, and making sure that you also help them achieve their visions, because it's not always about your vision. It's also about theirs. What do they want to achieve within the workplace, and how you can help that come to reality.
And what would you do differently?
Is when I sold my last company, he's perhaps had a 1-year break without immediately embarking on new projects and ideas, because I believe that break would have given me the energy which I now have a year later, but so I would have had a lot more energy to do ideas and implement ideas in a much better way.
And what makes South Africa a great place to start a small business?
Talking about South Africa generally, the US used to be the place where, you can make your millions and the whole American dream. And I think if you look economically at sort of, I think it's gross domestic profit versus debt ratio proportions, South Africa is where the US, for example, was many years ago, and poised to be the place to make money. So South Africa is a place sort of economically actually where opportunity really exists.
I know you've just had a new baby, but what keeps you up at night?
Having a new baby and a new entry into my family makes me want to work even harder to make sure that my child can have the best start he could have in his life. So suddenly, where I used to get to work and maybe not focus on certain things and be a bit scatty and all over the place because that's what I'm about, but still get things done, of course. Now I have much more of a bigger purpose when I go to my desk because I've got limited time. I have to make sure it happens there, and then, so my day's a lot more compressed.
And what gets you going in the morning?
What gets me going in the morning, other than waking up next to a beautiful woman who's my partner, it's just taking my ideas and moving them forward, because being an entrepreneur, as I said, isn't just about making money and making a difference. It's also about seeing your visions come into realities. And every day, if you can just take your vision that step further, that means you're getting that step closer to your reality, and that's what I do.
Avi, thank you very much. And thank you for joining us. We look forward to the coming weeks. We will bring you more South African entrepreneurs. I'm Paul Hobden. Thank you and goodbye.